Bomb. Celtics could make a trade in December. Who could be on the move? If you are a Celtics fan, I bet you have this strange feeling. The team is strong, but there is always that flea behind your ear. Is there a piece missing to guarantee another title? And the worst part is this. December has arrived, and with it, that phase of the year when rumors explode, and any news turns into anxiety. Because we know how it is, the right change can elevate the team, but the wrong change can mess everything up. So today I'll get straight to the point. Who can leave, why, and most importantly, what kind of move would make real sense for Boston now? No empty fanfare, no travel, realistic scenarios, cast reading, and what this means for the title race. If you want to understand what could be behind this bomb, stay with me for the next few minutes. Before getting into the names and scenarios, do the basics that help the channel a lot and keep you ahead of the rumors. Sign up now, because December is that month when things change quickly, and you don't want to find out about the change after everyone has already commented. And leave a like, because if this video reaches a good number of likes, I'll bring you a part 2 with realistic targets, fits, and possible proposals. Activate the bell too, because when hot news comes out, I'll come with a no-nonsense update. Now hold on to me, because from here I'm going to show you who can leave, the real reason, and which change would make sense to elevate this cast without destroying what already works. Let's get to what matters. What if the missing piece of Boston's title puzzle is quietly waiting in Portland? I know this phrase seems bold, but it stays with me for a few minutes because it explains a very important part of what the Celtics have been going through, and, mainly, what they may need to return to that defensive identity that, at certain times, seemed inevitable. There is a specific feeling that every Boston fan recognizes. It's not just a pretty move. It's not just a decisive pitch. It's that moment when the opposing attack thinks it has found an easy path to the basket, and suddenly, the play dies with a clean, strong, almost humiliating block. The ball flies away, the stands explode, and the game immediately changes temperature. For a long time, Robert Williams III was the embodiment of this energy. He wasn't just a good rim protector. He was a symbol of reaction, of immediate impact, of defense that intimidates before it even happens. The type of player who forces the opponent to rethink their attack plan in the first quarter, and that's exactly why his name is circulating so strongly again. When rumors of a possible rapprochement between Boston and Williams surface, I don't think it's out of cheap nostalgia. It's not just missing a beloved player. It's a reminder of a style of play that, no matter how much the team has found alternatives, is still missing in certain decisive moments. The Celtics remained competitive. The cast remained strong. The project remains big. But in a long season with natural fluctuations, injuries, and rotation adjustments, the team sometimes shows signs that it needs something clearer in internal defense. Someone who can change the opponent's behavior simply by being on the court. And when you think like that, Robert Williams' idea makes sense again. But let's treat this with the seriousness that the topic deserves, because there is a very fine line between ideal reinforcement and emotional gamble. And in this case, this line passes through a central point: health. In Portland, Williams faced exactly what has always been the biggest obstacle in his career. It's not talent. It's not defensive reading. It's not athletic ability. What limits the Time Lord is the body saying no more times than any team would like to hear. And I'm not saying this coldly. I speak as someone who follows this type of trajectory and understands the weight of what it means to see such a special player interrupted so many times. For an athlete with a defensive impact profile, continuity is everything. Without a consistent sequence, the player loses rhythm, loses confidence, and loses space in the rotation. And what was dominance becomes a flash. Still, when he manages to stay on the court, even when he's far from his prime, you see traces of what made him so valuable. The time he jumps, the reading help, the way he covers space with just a few steps, the ability to contest a layup and, on the next play, recover to pressure the rebound. This doesn't disappear out of nowhere. What changes is the frequency. And here comes the first point I want to highlight with you. Boston does not necessarily need the perfect Robert Williams, a classic version of effective memories. The team doesn't need a superhero. You need a realistic, functional, strategic piece. If Williams can deliver 20 to 25 well-organized minutes with smart rim protection, good good rotations, and the ability to change 1 or 2 possessions per period, that's a huge leap forward, especially in big games, in long series, on nights when the opponent finds a dangerous rhythm attacking the paint. And that's when the conversation starts to get more interesting, because the Celtics, even with creative solutions and players who came to fill gaps, still operate very much in the set scheme. There is energy, there is effort, there is functional rotation, there are different profile alternatives. This has merit. But there is a brutal difference between a defense that works and a defense that scares. Robert Williams at his peak was scary, and even with a reduced version, it can still offer something that doesn't always appear in statistics: the psychological effect. The player making the attack hesitates. The pivot that makes the point guard look at the rim and decide to back off. The rim protector that reduces the opponent's aggression just by presence. Now, the burning question is simple, and I'll put it directly. Is it worth betting on this now? In an in-season trade, the logic seems complicated. Not because Boston doesn't recognize the value in Williams, but because this type of move requires a delicate balance of salaries and often sacrifices pieces that currently support the rotation. And no contender likes to change the depth of their squad midway if they don't have an obvious and secure advantage. Furthermore, Portland is not in a position to hand over a player at that level without trying to extract future value. Every team that thinks about its own project wants assets. You want choices, want development youth. You want something that makes sense within a bigger plan. And a team like Boston, with title ambitions and a consolidated core, is unlikely to get rid of important pieces of the rotation just to test a short-term medical bet. That would be too risky. So, when it comes to immediate exchange, I see more obstacles than facilities. But that doesn't mean the path is closed. It just means that the calendar could be different. And here comes a territory that is usually decisive for teams that want to win without compromising the backbone of the squad: the buyout market. If Portland at some point understands that keeping Williams until the end of the season does not align with the development of the younger frontcourt pieces, the buyout door becomes a plausible scenario. It's not a guarantee, it's not obvious, but it's a type of decision that the league has seen happen several times in similar contexts. And if that door opens, Boston automatically becomes one of the most natural destinations for him. Why? Because the fit is obvious, because there is tactical memory, because there is real chemistry with much of the core, because he already knows the defensive pattern, the charging environment, the emotional rhythm of the fans, the weight of playing for a team with high expectations every night. He wouldn't need a semester to adapt to the language of the Celtics game. He would come back speaking fluently. Now, think with me about the impact this would have in terms of the season and playoffs. The Celtics could gain an additional rim protection option for more physical games. Williams could be used in specific formations, with controlled minutes to preserve health. It could reintroduce that vertical pressure that makes the opponent avoid the box and abuse contested shots from medium distance. And in a playoff series, that kind of adjustment can completely change the balance. It's not an exaggeration to say that, because in the postseason, it's not just those who have offensive talent that win. Whoever can take comfort from their opponent wins. Whoever manages to impose discomfort on specific points on the court wins. And the rim, historically, is the place where championships are decided. If you control the rim, you control the courage of the rival attack. But there is also the other, calmer and, honestly, more logical route: free agency. When the season ends, Boston reevaluates everything with a cool head. Understand what worked, what didn't work, and what was missing in moments when the margin was minimal. And it is in this final photograph that Williams' return may seem even more rational. Because negotiation in this case would not require losing parts along the way. It wouldn't require reshuffling a rotation that's trying to stabilize during the season. It would not require betting big in an uncertain scenario. It would be a planned decision with in-depth medical analysis, more controllable costs, and realistic expectations aligned with the role. And I like to talk about realistic expectations because this is the detail that avoids frustration. The best possible scenario is not to imagine that Robert Williams will come back and become the same force he was 2 or 3 years ago with total consistency. That's a beautiful but risky dream. The best possible scenario is to think about it as a situational high-impact play. A player who, if used well, could be exactly that defensive boost that the team needs in April, May, and June. And now I want to get to the most sensitive point of all this, the fans' pain. Because I know that most people who follow this subject feel two things at the same time. The first is hope, the memory of what it was like when the Time Lord was flying, covering everything, transforming the bottle into forbidden territory. The second is fear. Fear of emotionally betting on a comeback and seeing the injury scenario repeat itself. And this fear is legitimate. What I think is important to say is that mature discussion does not need to choose an extreme. It can exist in between. You can recognize the risk and at the same time admit that the docking potential is real. The secret is in the cost. If Williams' arrival requires the dismantling of a functional rotation, I understand the resistance. If he comes along a path that preserves the core and adds defensive depth without compromising structure, then the story changes. Then the risk is controlled, and the potential benefit begins to outweigh the doubt. And for a team that thinks about the title, this type of controlled bet is exactly what differentiates a strong candidate from a champion. Because the champion is not the perfect team. It is the team that finds an advantage where others cannot. It is the team that reads the market calmly, that does not despair, but also does not ignore opportunities. It is the team that understands that, at certain times, an unlikely return is precisely the movement that closes the cycle. The NBA loves homecoming stories, and sometimes these stories aren't just emotional, they are tactics. When a player returns to the environment in which he played his best basketball, with a coach, system, and culture that enhance his strengths, the chances of a consistent recovery increase, not because magic exists, but because context matters. And Boston has always been an ideal context for Williams. I can't predict which route will open first. Trade, buyout, free agency, each one has its variables, its expectations, and its obstacles. But I can clearly say what makes this discussion so relevant. Robert Williams represents a possible answer to a specific type of problem that Boston is still trying to solve perfectly. And that's why his name isn't going away from this debate anytime soon. If you ask me for a very honest view, almost like a backstage conversation between fans who live this team, I would say the following. The Time Lord's return does not need to be treated as the absolute solution to the project, but it could be the difference between a very good team and a team that again imposes defensive fear. And this distinction in big games is huge. So what I want you to take away from this video and what we're discussing here is a simple and powerful idea. Boston is not desperate. Boston doesn't need 1,000 changes. But Boston may be one smart decision away from reclaiming something that was once its hallmark. And if that decision involves the return of a player that the fans know, respect, and know exactly what he can deliver when his body allows it, then the story gains weight. Not because she's romantic, but because it's plausible. Now, I really want to know how you see this possibility. Do you think the Celtics should consider a realistic path to bringing Robert Williams back? Do you believe the risk is worth the attempt, as long as the cost is adequate? Or would you prefer the team to continue with internal alternatives and look for another profile in the market? Write your vision in the comments, because I want to cross-reference this reading with yours. And if you agree that the Time Lord's return could be an important part of this title race, even with controlled minutes and a well-defined role, leave a like. This helps me bring a part 2 analyzing fit scenarios, quintet combinations, and how Boston could use this version of Williams strategically without relying on fantasy. Because at the end of the day, that's what champion teams do. They don't expect the perfect version of the world. They build advantage with what is possible. And perhaps what is possible now is exactly a defense that once again has that electricity that we never forget. And that's why this story isn't just internet rumor. Because when you put everything on the table, the specific lack of rim protection in big moments, the tactical fit, the familiarity with the system, and the controlled minutes factor, Robert Williams' return stops being nostalgia and becomes a real possibility of impact. We're not talking about bringing in someone to save the season alone. We're talking about recovering a weapon that Boston already had, already knows how to use, and perhaps needs exactly at the time when the game gets heavier, more physical, and more cruel. And if that opportunity presents itself, if in a buyout or intelligently in free agency, it could be that type of move that only makes complete sense when we look back. That movement that changes the team's ceiling. That detail that separates a great candidate from a real champion. So now I ask you bluntly, would you get back together with the Time Lord? Yes or no? And why? I want your answer in the comments. And if you like this type of direct content, well explained and with a realistic scenario, go to the pinned comment now and click on the Celtics Analyses playlist. There I am organizing all the most important analyses of the season, roster, adjustments, rotations, market, and what could define Boston's path to the playoffs. Watch the next video on the playlist, because if this bomb is just the beginning, the next piece of this puzzle could be even bigger.